What if the very ground beneath our understanding of love is not merely unstable, but entirely illusory? In the darkest depths of human consciousness lies a truth so devastating that our entire civilization has been built as a bulwark against it. Love, as we conceive it, is impossible. This impossibility is not a limitation to be overcome, but rather the first glimpse into an abyss that holds a deeper truth. To speak of love, to believe in it as we do, is to commit a profound transgression against reality itself. Yet this transgression is not a simple error to be corrected, but rather a necessary stage in a cosmic drama that unfolds at the very edge of being. In the depths where reality reveals itself in its raw form, love manifests as its apparent opposite, as affliction, as destruction, as the negation of being itself. This is not a rejection of love, but rather its terrible transfiguration. Consider how we flee from suffering, how we build our philosophies and religions as shields against the raw edge of existence. But what if our very flight is itself a form of blindness? What if the crucifixion, that central image of suffering transformed, is not merely a historical event or religious symbol, but the only reality? The human belief in love as warmth, as connection, as fulfillment, reveals itself not merely as illusion, but as sin, not in any moralistic sense, but as a fundamental and necessary misalignment with the nature of reality. To transfer this human conception of love into the realm of ultimate reality is to engage in pure destruction. Yet paradoxically, this very deconstruction becomes the only authentic manifestation of love possible for human beings. There exists within consciousness a truth so devastating that reality itself conspires to conceal it, the edge where being meets non-being. This edge is not metaphorical, but constitutes the actual structure of consciousness, the precise point where the I that we claim as our innermost reality simultaneously manifests and dissolves itself. This point of infinite tension generates its own veiling by producing states of ecstatic encounterings that, while seeming to transcend the self through so-called infinite love, actually manifest as experiences claimed by the experiencing I, their very nature revealing how they remain caught within the dualistic structure they purport to overcome. The ecstasy itself becomes the veil that obscures this truth through its very intensity, as an infinite deferral of the edge's penetration. The mechanism of this deferral operates through what we might call perfect illusion, a state of consciousness that must be cultivated to its maximum intensity precisely because it is illusion. This is not deception in any ordinary sense, but rather the necessary architecture of consciousness itself. The more perfectly we construct this illusion, the more completely we extend the infinite distance between awareness and its own dissolution. Yet this very extension, this infinite deferral, contains within it the seeds of its own unraveling. What happens when consciousness glimpses the moment of its own penetration? When the perfect illusion attains its apex and life trembles in fear of the inevitable nothingness. Here we encounter suffering in its pure form, a suffering that exists not to be overcome, but to end the very possibility of overcoming. Our attempts to conceptualize this suffering, to give it philosophical form, serve only to deepen and extend it. This extension transforms into a peculiar kind of hatred, not a hatred of any particular thing, but hatred as the pure form of consciousness confronting its own limitations. This hatred reveals itself as the final manifestation of consciousness before its dissolution, the ultimate bearer of truth precisely because it remains forever exempt from the edge's sharpness. This exemption creates an infinite amplification of presence, a maximum emptiness that paradoxically becomes maximum fullness. Within human consciousness, this manifests as a unique form of despair, one that radiates not from the loss of hope, but from hope without an object, marking the final path where reality collapses into itself. Consider the profound absurdity. To love the very limitation that constitutes one's being, to live within this absurdity requires not its resolution, but its completion, the destruction of the self precisely through that which makes selfhood possible. Yet this love reveals itself as impossible precisely because limitation is what maintains our coherence as an I. To truly love it would mean to embrace that which prevents our dissolution, making the destruction of self through love a paradoxical impossibility. Here, defiance emerges not as opposition, but as the purest form of acceptance, arising exactly from the recognition of this impossibility, an acceptance more authentic than any conscious acceptance could ever be, because it manifests the truth of our predicament. The defiance that arises in this confrontation reveals itself as the truth of transcendent being, the only form of being possible at the depths of reality. The perfect illusion must be maintained with maximum intensity precisely at the moment it reveals itself as illusion. This paradox does not resolve itself, but rather becomes the very ground of consciousness, the space where meaning simultaneously constructs and deconstructs itself. In this space, rebellion against limitation becomes indistinguishable from complete submission to it, not because they are the same, but because they occupy the same point in the topology of consciousness. In the raw manifestation of passion as defiance, essence shines forth with an intensity that conscious thought can never achieve. This is not a descent into animality, but rather the revelation of limitation itself. The human being emerges as neither divine nor animal, but as the void between them, a living tension, an empty space where the impossible becomes manifest. In this space, defiance reveals itself not as moral failing, but as despair in motion, as the most turbulent way of being. To exist as a living schism, to be present in the divine gaze, is to surrender oneself to its love in its most terrible form. The act of knowing itself becomes defiance. Yet in this defiance lies a truth more profound than any submission, the tear that moistens the eye of the rebel, the eternal no that makes possible every yes. And divinity itself was born from this tear, the singular point where transcendence becomes truly present. Here at the edge of philosophical comprehension, we encounter a truth that dethrones all previous understanding. Crude manifestation, what we dismiss as base instinct or raw passionality, becomes the site where essence blazes forth as the absolute reality of the world. The human being, suspended in the void between transcendence and immanence, becomes not a fallen creature to be redeemed, but the necessary space where limitation itself achieves revelation. To be present in the divine gaze is to become prey to its love, not the gentle love of conventional theology, but the devastating love that manifests as affliction. Knowledge itself emerges as defiance, yet this defiance contains a purity greater than any conscious love could achieve. The transcendent love, the only real love, manifests in pure negation, in the absolute rejection that paradoxically becomes the ultimate affirmation. In this final revelation, we discover that transcendence's presence, its very birth, occurs in the most unexpected place, in the tear of the primordial no, that aspect of being which forever stands against its own source, whose very rejection becomes the foundation of all affirmation. This is not metaphor, but the most literal truth. Divinity emerges not from light, but from the depth of the lacerating limitation itself. The tear that moistens the eye of the rebel becomes the foundational moment of all reality, the point where absence becomes presence, where rejection becomes affirmation, where the impossible becomes the only truth. What began as an inquiry into the nature of love has led us to a place beyond love and hatred, beyond good and evil, beyond being and non-being. The perfect illusion that we were told to cultivate dissolves not into disillusionment, but into a truth more real than reality itself. In this final paradox, we discover that the void between transcendence and immanence is not empty, but rather too full, crackling with the tension of opposites that refuse resolution. This refusal itself becomes the highest form of resolution, the point where all dualities collapse not into unity, but into a truth that transcends both unity and division. We end where we began, but everything has changed. Love remains impossible in the depths of reality, yet this very impossibility becomes the only possible manifestation of love's deepest truth. In the tear that moistens the eye of the eternal rebel, in the despair that radiates from objectless hope, in the perfect illusion that awaits the truth penetration, we find not answers, but a transformation so complete that it changes not just our understanding, but the very nature of understanding itself.